Today's session is an introduction to the physiology of the respiratory system. Our learning objectives are to define the respiration, describe the airway passage, describe the functional unit of the respiratory system, describe and define what is surfactant and state its function and importance, state the functions of the respiratory system, and describe the clinical application of today's lecture. To start with, we have to define what is respiration. Respiration is the process of inhaling oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide, but it is not as simple as that. It's divided into two processes: external respiration, which is the actual process of inhaling the oxygen and exhaling or removing the carbon dioxide from the body as a whole, and the internal respiration, which is the cellular respiration or the cellular breathing. It's the actual utilization of the oxygen and the production of the carbon dioxide by the cell in an attempt to get the energy from the food. The respiration occurs by the respiratory system, which is composed of a gas exchange organ, which is the lung, and a pump that ventilate this lung. The pump is formed of the thoracic wall and the respiratory muscles. The respiratory system starts by the nose and ends in the alveoli inside the lung. The alveoli is considered to be the functional unit of the respiratory system. For the atmospheric air to reach the functional unit of the respiratory system, which is the alveoli, it needs to pass through the air passage. The air passage starts by the nose and ends by the respiratory bronchioles that contains the alveoli. So we have the nose, trachea, two main branches and their branches in the form of bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, alveolar duct, and alveoli. Between the trachea and the alveoli, the airway divides 23 times. The first 16 division, up to the terminal bronchioles, it form what is known as conducting zone, and from its name, it functions as a conducting passage that transport the gas and perform the air conditioning function. The remaining 7 division, from the respiratory bronchioles till the alveoli, it forms what is known as the respiratory zone, and from its name, it functions as an actual respiratory area where the gas exchange takes place between the alveoli and the blood. It is important to note that we have 300 million of alveoli in the human lung. It forms a total surface area of 70 to 100 square meter, similar to the surface area of a tennis court. It is important to know the microstructure of each part of the respiratory system because it will be reflected on the function of each part of the respiratory system. So kindly please revise the microstructure and the histology of each part of the respiratory system. It's important for us to know the functions of the conducting zone. The conducting zone starts from the nose till the terminal bronchioles, so it's the first 16 divisions of the air passage. It warms and humidifies the inspired air, distribute the air to the gas exchange area of the lung, serve as part of the body defense system. It contains the mucocellular transport system that keep the microorganisms, the dust particles, away from entering the alveoli. What is the functional units of the respiratory system? The alveoli represent the functional unit of the respiratory system. It's formed of type 1 cells, which are thin primary lining cell in the form of simple squamous epithelium. Type 2 cell, they are thick cell with many inclusion bodies, granular pneumocytes. They are the actual surfactant secreting cell. And then we have other cells such as pulmonary alveolar macrophage, lymphocytes, mast cell, and plasma cell. In the functional unit of the respiratory system, the alveoli, we said that we have type 2 alveolar epithelial cell that secretes surfactant. So what is surfactant? Surfactant is a complex mixture of several phospholipid proteins and ions responsible for reducing the surface tension in the alveoli, allowing alveolar expansion and preventing its collapse. To understand what do we mean by reducing the surface tension, it's important to know the principle of the surface tension. So what is surface tension? When water forms a surface with the air, the water molecules on the surface tend to attract one another. As a result, the water surface is always attempting to contract. And this is what holds the raindrops together So there is a tight contractile membrane of water molecules around the entire surface of the raindrop. What happens in the inner surface of the alveoli is almost the same. Here, the water surface is always attempting to contract. This results in an attempt to force the air out of the alveoli through the bronchi, and in doing so, this causes the alveoli to try to collapse. The net effect is to cause an elastic contractile force of the entire lung, which is known as surface tension elastic force. The presence of the surfactant between the water molecules try to reduce the surface tension, giving a chance for the alveoli to expand and prevent its collapse. Now we'll talk about the mechanism of respiration. We said earlier that respiration is divided into external respiration and internal respiration. For the whole process to occur, it passes through 4 steps or 4 processes. Number 1, pulmonary ventilation. Ventilation means gas flow to an organ, and since we are talking about the lung, we are talking about pulmonary ventilation. When the gas passes to an organ, which is the lung, it will be useless unless it has been delivered to each single cell to perform the internal breathing or the internal respiration. To do this, we need a blood flow to the organ, so we need pulmonary perfusion. What do you mean by perfusion? Perfusion is the flow of the blood to an organ. And these two processes occur at the same time. We have a ventilation and a perfusion occurring in the lung, giving us what is known as ventilation-perfusion ratio. So we have amount of air flow to the lung equals to 4 liters per minute. And the amount of the blood that passes to the lung is the actual cardiac output, which is 5 liters per minute. When we put 4 divided by 5, the ventilation-perfusion ratio will be 0.8. The second step in the mechanism of respiration is the gas exchange. Carbon dioxide and oxygen diffuse between the alveoli and the blood by simple diffusion. This is known as the external respiration. During rest, an adult inspires 250 milliliter of the oxygen per minute and expires 200 milliliter of carbon dioxide per minute. So we have what is known as respiratory ratio, which is the carbon dioxide produced divided by the oxygen consumed. So we will have 200 divided by 250, and the ratio is 0.8. The third step in the mechanism of respiration is the transport of gases, where blood carries oxygen from the lung to the tissues and carbon dioxide from the tissues to the lungs. The exchange of gases between the blood and the tissue is known as internal respiration. The fourth step in the mechanism of respiration is regulation of breathing. It's done by the respiratory center in the medullary region. The details of regulation of breathing will be discussed. So remember, the mechanism of respiration is done by 4 processes: pulmonary ventilation, exchange of gas, transport of gases, and regulation of breathing. What is the function of the respiratory system? Number 1, the exchange of gas between the air and the blood, and this is done by simple diffusion. Number 2, the pulmonary defense mechanism. This occurs against the dust particle and microorganisms such as the bacteria and viruses, and it's carried by the nasal hair, the presence of the mucus, the movement of the cilia in the air passage. Remember that the movement of the cilia can be reduced by the cigarette smoking, by the presence of the pulmonary alveolar macrophage that phagocytose the particle that reaches the alveoli. It's also done by the sneezing and coughing reflexes, and I do advise you to read about the mechanism of sneezing and coughing reflexes. The third function of the respiratory system is the air conditioning function, where the air passage has the ability to humidify the dry air, adjust the inspired air temperature to be near the body temperature. The fourth function of the respiratory system is the metabolic and endocrine function. The respiratory system has the ability to activate angiotensin 1 by angiotensin converting enzyme into angiotensin 2, which causes vasoconstriction and increase the arterial blood pressure. Also, it has the ability to secrete prostaglandin and histamine, has the ability to remove noradrenaline, prostaglandin, and serotonin from the blood. Also, respiratory system contains the fibrinolytic system, which lyses the blood clot and remove them from the pulmonary circulation. and also the most important function, which is the formation of the surfactant that reduce the surface tension in the alveoli, allowing its expansion and preventing its collapse. Always remember the functions of the respiratory system can be divided into respiratory function and non-respiratory function. The respiratory function includes pulmonary ventilation, exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lung airspace and the blood by diffusion, transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lung and body tissue by the blood, exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood and tissue by diffusion. The non-respiratory function include playing a role in the regulation of acid-base balance in the blood, participating in the defense mechanism against the pathogen and foreign particle in the airway, provide the route for the water and heat loss, enhance the venous return by the respiratory pump mechanism, activating certain plasma protein as they pass through the pulmonary circulation, enables vocalization. What could be the clinical importance of today's lecture? After knowing the information in today's lecture, we have to ask ourselves an important question. Why the lung is dry? The answer is the pulmonary capillary hydrostatic pressure is only 10 mm mercury, while the colloidal osmotic pressure of the plasma protein is 25 mm mercury. Referring back to the Starling forces, we'll find that the absorbing force, which is the colloidal osmotic pressure of the plasma protein, is much higher than the filtrating force, which is the pulmonary capillary hydrostatic pressure. That's why the water reabsorption is always done at the level of the lung, and that's why the lung remains dry, which is very important for its elasticity. So what will happen if the lung is not dry? If the lung is not dry, there will be accumulation of fluid in the air sac, which is the alveoli in the lung, giving us what is known as pulmonary edema. Pulmonary edema occurs in the same way that edema occurs elsewhere in the body. So if there is increase in the filtrating force, which is the capillary hydrostatic pressure, and there is decrease in the absorbing force, which is the colloidal osmotic pressure in the pulmonary circulation, there will be accumulation of fluid in the pulmonary interstitial space and alveoli, giving us what is known as pulmonary edema. The most common causes of pulmonary edema could be left side heart failure or mitral valve disease, accompanied by great increase in the pulmonary venous pressure and pulmonary capillary pressure, leading to accumulation of fluid in the interstitial space and alveoli. Also, any damage to the pulmonary blood capillary membrane by infection or by irritant gas, such as the chlorine or the sulfur dioxide gas, could lead to accumulation of fluid in the interstitial space and alveoli, giving us pulmonary edema. By this, we finish today's lecture. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you.